So we'll be talking about fatigue and mitochondrial dysfunction, and we'll also go through a case report. We'll be looking at the Aristotle and applying it to a fatigue case. So, okay, our learning objectives. We're going to define what fatigue is. We're going to look at the signs and symptoms of fatigue. We're going to understand fatigue through the lens of impaired mitochondrial and metabolic dysfunction. And then we're going to apply the Theriome Aristotle test to a patient with fatigue. This test is Theriome's Metabolomic test. So for fatigue, we're going to look at some epidemiological information, some associated conditions, conventional lab testing. We'll go through some mitochondrial metabolites. And then for our case study, we'll just go kind of top to bottom. You have a patient that comes with their background and history in some labs and apply that information to interpreting a theriome. What is fatigue? So fatigue is a persistent feeling of tiredness and lethargy that prevents one from carrying out daily activities. Now, the thing to be aware of is it can be a normal response to an event. So if someone has lack of sleep, they're going to be fatigued. If they've exercised vigorously, they're going to be fatigued. People that are in a acute calorie deficit, they're going to feel fatigued. Acute illness, traveling, or even just boredom, sometimes that's going to lead to fatigue. So that's one thing to keep in mind if somebody is having an episode of fatigue versus having chronic fatigue. So it is a concern when it lasts longer than a few days, impairs daily activities, doesn't have a clear cause, quick onset coupled with weight gain or weight loss, which can, again, big indicator of some metabolic dysfunction going on there, and comes with other medical symptoms. So in general, it's one of the most common complaints in a primary care setting. Approximately 33% of patients report significant fatigue in a primary care visit. When you look at the most common causes of fatigue, viral illnesses, URIs, big contributor to fatigue, iron deficiency anemia, bronchitis, adverse effects from various medications, depression or other mental disorders, also a big cause of contributing to fatigue. In general, we look at the prevalence. 18.5% of the time it's due to depression. 4.3% of the time it's from serious somatic disease. So this is from someone that's really analyzing their health, kind of deeply thinking about it, and then kind of somatizing their symptoms. 2.8% of the time it's from anemia, and 0.6% of the time it's due to malignancy. In general, occurs more often in females than males due to the association of iron deficiency as a consequence of menstruation. So associated conditions, there's many different associated conditions that can contribute to fatigue. In general, standard American diet, SAD diet, with high sugar, low quality fats, highly processed, low antioxidants can make an individual feel fatigued. Lack of sleep, whether due to insomnia, obstructive sleep apnea, narcolepsy,
You're muted.
Am I unmuted now? Was I unmuted the whole time?
No, just for a minute.
Okay, thank you. So various medications can do it: antidepressants, antihistamines, sedatives, antihypertensives, statins, steroids, acetaminophen, and aspirin. It could be psychological as well: depression, anxiety, grief, PTSD. Work schedule. If they have an irregular work schedule, shift work, night work, long hours, short breaks, overtime, that can make someone feel fatigued. Lots of health conditions have associations with fatigue. Anemia being a big one. Thyroid disorders, infections, heart disease, lung disorders, autoimmune. Hormone imbalances, chronic viral infections, ME/CFS, which is the medical terminology for chronic fatigue syndrome. Lyme disease, tick-borne illness, cancer, fibromyalgia, lots of them have fatigue as a consequence. Environmental exposures, toxins or toxicants, whether they're man-made or come from a natural means, can lead to fatigue. Heavy metals, solvents, plasticizing compounds, pesticides, mycotoxins, damaged, malfunctional proteins, fats, and sugars. Things like advanced glycation end products. This could lead to fatigue due to mitochondrial disruption. And of course, nutrient deficiencies as well can lead to fatigue. So one thing I thought that was very interesting when I learned about this is the governor fatigue theory, which is a homeostatic input that is leading to fatigue. So it's basically our brain. So if we're low in neurotransmitters, that could lead to fatigue. So if we're low in dopamine, serotonin, glutamate, GABA, that could lead to fatigue. But also our brain is constantly sensing our environment, our musculature. So if things are abnormal with our muscle, if the pH is off, if the electrolytes are off, if they're highly inflamed, accumulated phosphates, or there's some electrolyte dysregulation, our brain can sense this and go, wait a minute, we need to chill out. We need to stop doing what we're doing because there's something going on with the musculature. So our brain could be telling us to feel fatigued. The same thing with an infection too. When there is high inflammation that's present, our brain is sensing that, and that will induce the fatigue as a protective mechanism. So this is one thing to keep in mind is when somebody is feeling fatigued, is it the brain that is literally just censoring the peripheral environment, which could be due to lots of different things. There could be failures in energy metabolism. This is where the mitochondria comes into play. Is it an acidic environment? So the best case of this is excessive exercising. If you go from 0 to 100, you're pushing yourself to the max for some exercise, you will fatigue. You will reach the point where you can no longer do activity. But on a smaller scale, that could be happening to people even if they're not exercising, because there's some abnormal muscle physiology going on that the brain is sensing. So it's something to keep in mind. When looking at conventional lab testing for fatigue, we're looking to rule out infections, bleeding, anemia. We can look at kidney and liver function with the CMP. Is there blood sugar dysregulation? How someone's electrolytes? HbA1c is a more long-term metric of blood sugar. Thyroid, look at that as well. Iron deficiency, looking at ferritin. Inflammation, crude markers, ESR and hsCRP. And then B12 and folate to rule out anemia and deficiencies in producing energy there. So the mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell, right, guys? So it will help produce energy through various different means. It'll help, whether it's fats, carbs, or sugars, turn it into energy. Our mitochondria will be doing various things. They could do fission or fusion, where they're splitting or combining to make more energy. There's mitophagy, where we can recycle our mitochondria. And within the mitochondria, there's something called this respiratory chain. This is where we are generating energy from external sources. One big thing to keep in mind, especially as it pertains to metabolite testing, is this, they call it the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle, or the citric acid cycle. This is where we're basically stripping electrons to go into oxidative phosphorylation, which is this process up here, where we're using this electrochemical gradient to convert ADP into ATP, which is the molecule or unit of energy in the body. So this one big thing is, do we have enough ATP? That's the role of the mitochondria. Lots of things can go wrong with the mitochondria. So when we're looking at hallmarks of mitochondrial dysfunction, altered biogenesis, so our body's not making sufficient mitochondria, diminished ATP synthesis. This is where that oxidative phosphorylation step I mentioned is not working properly. Turn my head here. Reshaped mitochondrial morphology. So as we experience more dysfunction, our mitochondria are going to be misshapen. Defects in energy metabolism. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Remodeling mitochondrial complex levels and activities. So we're going to see some alterations there. High oxidative stress can contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction. Altered fission and fusion. These are crucial steps. You don't want to see those dysregulated. And then calcium dysregulation. One huge hallmark of aging in general, let alone mitochondrial dysfunction, but that could also alter our mitochondrial work. So when we have mitochondrial dysfunction, it's a contributor to many different types of conditions. Insulin resistance, obesity, stroke, cardiovascular complications, diabetes, you name it, mitochondrial dysregulation is going to be at the core of that. What is leading to mitochondrial dysfunction? So lots of different things can do that. If we have high caloric intake, that could lead to mitochondrial dysfunction. Mutations in the mitochondrial DNA. This isn't just inherited. We can acquire mitochondrial mutations through environmental exposures. The mitochondrial genome does not have the type of repair capacity that our nuclear genome has. And so it's more susceptible to these mutations. Environmental insults. We're releasing a practitioner training series, and one of the webinars is on environmental exposures. And so in that webinar, we look at heavy metals, pesticides, mycotoxins, and specifically how they are altering the mitochondria for worse. Yeah, but they will have various mechanisms of mitochondrial disruption nonetheless. Homeostatic balance, so OX-redox balance, excess ROS going to lead to mitochondrial dysfunction. Glucolipotoxicity, so how is endoplasmic reticulum, one of the organelles in the cell, interacting with the mitochondria? That's off, is going to lead to mitochondrial dysfunction. Ultimately, these serve to decrease electron transport chain, decrease respiration, decrease calcium homeostasis, and decrease beta oxidation, which will lead to an accumulation of lipids, leading to altered lipid signaling, and ultimately leading to other conditions or many conditions that are associated with this lipidemia, hyperlipidemia, heart disease, insulin resistance. And so those are other issues there. You can look at metabolites that are dysregulated in fatigue, specifically chronic fatigue syndrome. And so this is a study that looked at metabolite markers in individuals with chronic fatigue syndrome. And so some things that you'll see differently, we see elevated glucose, elevated pyruvate, elevated lactate. If you look at the mitochondrial cycle, you have those glucose going to pyruvate, which will then enter into the TCA cycle. You have the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, requires many different B vitamins and even non-B vitamins like alpha lipoic acid And so if there's defects with that pyruvate dehydrogenase complex, or there's some certain environmental exposures that can target that, or there's nutrient deficiencies, you will see an accumulation of pyruvate. And then if you're not going down into the TCA cycle, you're going to form lactate. And so this makes sense that you're going to see this level of disruption in chronic fatigue syndrome. For the TCA cycle, if you're not going into the TCA cycle to make those metabolites, you would expect to see lower amounts of these TCA cycle metabolites in chronic fatigue syndrome. And we do. We see lower citrate, lower siliconatate, lower isocitrate, lower oxoglutarate, lower malic acid, lower succinic. So that all makes sense. To go into the TCA cycle then, if we're not going through glucose, we could go through amino acids. This is where glutamine might be going this pathway. So that's why we're actually seeing glutamine upregulated there. And also you see dysregulation is other aspects of metabolic function. So the urea cycle in chronic fatigue syndrome, lower arginine, lower urea, much higher ornithine. I think this is a pretty interesting finding in the study, which is going to be playing a role in the urea cycle. So for some reason in chronic fatigue, they're not able to do that interconversion that well with ornithine, and lower citrulline as well. So you can look at certain metabolic signatures in individuals with chronic fatigue. And again, there's a myriad of reasons why these changes can be occurring. One big one, and I think we're going to do a full webinar on this because this is, first off, 'tis the season. A lot of people are getting viral illnesses now because the viruses just come out of hiding in the winter. Right now, everyone's immune systems are suppressed, and viruses that they're not typically hanging out in blood, they're hanging out in tissues. And now they are coming out to play because our immune system can't keep them at bay. Viral infections or viruses will contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction through a myriad of means, and they're going to have a myriad of effects because, as I mentioned, when you dysregulate the mitochondria, you're going to have alterations in skeletal muscle functions, alterations in cardiac functioning, brain function, gastrointestinal. A large portion of our immune system resides in our gut, and it's highly metabolically active. It's one of the most rapidly cellular turnover organs there is. So if our mitochondria is dysfunctional, you're going to see gut issues as well. And then immune dysfunction. Viral infections is a big one, even in healthy people as well. And that's one thing I'd like to cover with viral infections is if you can have a viral infection and still be healthy in appearance. And they've done studies with post-mortem individuals. Let's say they died in a motor vehicle accident or something, and they've tested those individuals, various tissues, even brain tissue, lymphatic tissue, and they're all a high degree of people are carrying these viruses in their body. They're just not outwardly coughing or sick. So, but it could be leading to this kind of low-grade mitochondrial dysfunction. And this could be observed with things like Alzheimer's disease, where we have formation of beta amyloid plaques, which is now seems to be a response to the body in dealing with a chronic viral infection. And there's all sorts of different types of viruses. Epstein-Barr, big one, SARS-CoV, HHV, CMV, so all sorts of ones. One thing is that CoQ10 has been shown to help decrease the negative effects of viral infections on fatigue, and it's because it's helping restore mitochondrial function. So because viruses will hijack our cellular proteins, and they're going to be altering our function of our mitochondria for their own benefit. That's a key note of a virus there. So just another thing that could lead to dysregulation of our mitochondria and lead to fatigue. So let's look at a case study. We have a vignette here. So James is a 40-year-old male with a long history of feeling tired, not like himself, and he's wondering if he's just getting old. His main symptoms are lack of energy in the afternoon, weight gain, and difficulty concentrating. He works 50 hours per week doing new carpet installations. Wonder if he's exposed to something doing those new carpet installations. His medical history includes mononucleosis at age 14, more recently diagnosed with anxiety and depression, for which he takes paroxetine. His last set of labs was a year ago, and he was diagnosed with high cholesterol. His doctor said during his last visit that he had metabolic syndrome. So what are his main symptoms? Low energy, weight gain, impaired concentration. If we're looking at the timeline of his fatigue, he mentioned his energy levels felt pretty good until his first child. During that time, he lost a lot of sleep. That's one thing to consider. When we have lack of sleep, we're going to decrease our immune function, decrease our resilience, increase oxidative stress. We're going to predispose ourselves for various different exposures and mitochondrial dysfunction. He mentioned he had some financial issues soon thereafter, which exposed him to a lot of stress. He then felt run down, had a horrible flu during this time. So that's one thing you'll see is some people, they'll have an illness, it'll be the worst infection they ever had or the worst flu they ever had. And really, their body was just so susceptible to something that made them feel horrendous with this kind of dysfunctional pattern that's making them susceptible. He used to have a good diet, but then things got busy, and so he opted for more processed foods during this time. So it's kind of just a recipe for disruption and fatigue there. His health history: mom has a history of cardiovascular disease. His dad was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. His past medical history: diagnosed with anxiety, depression, hyperlipidemia, and metabolic syndrome. His surgical history: he had a tonsillectomy at 13 years old and a root canal at 35 years old. When he gave previous labs, some relevant ones, his HDL was 40 milligrams per deciliter, triglycerides were 175 milligrams per deciliter, and his fasting blood glucose was 119, which, if you look at the diagnostic criteria for metabolic syndrome, in men, anything less than 40 milligrams per deciliter, 40 milligrams per deciliter for HDL is diagnostic for metabolic syndrome. Well, actually, you need several of these. If you have a waist circumference greater than 90 centimeters in men, that's a risk factor. Triglycerides greater than 150, blood pressure greater than 130, or systolic greater than 85 diastolic, and fasting glucose over 100. So he already has some of these. And if we go on to the next section, look at his anthropometrics. His waist is greater than 90 centimeters. It's 96, and his waist to hip ratio is 1.2. So we know just from the waist to hip ratio alone, he's at risk for metabolic syndrome and metabolic disruption. Also, elevated blood pressure, 142 over 85. So he hits every one of those there. His diet, typically a standard American diet: cereal and coffee for breakfast, pastry or sandwich for lunch, spaghetti, some sort of meat for dinner, on occasion some vegetables, typically spinach. Loves his caffeine. As one thing you'll see with people with chronic fatigue, they will go for caffeine because it gives them energy, which helps in the short run, not so good in the long run. Espresso shots in the morning, and then when he's feeling a little bit more tired in the afternoon, when that wears off, we'll have another coffee. Sleep, on average, 5 hours a night, and he doesn't feel rested. That's a huge one right there. That's actually usually where I start. If given all this, if somebody's not even sleeping, you could do everything else. But if they're only getting 5 hours of sleep, that's if they're just not going to be in a good place to heal. And is it even quality sleep? You see his HRV here is 35. That's pretty low. Usually I like to see people in 50 to 60. So we see the stress is just dropping the HRV, which is probably affecting the poor sleep. His exercise: he will walk in the evening, but doesn't have time for the gym. This is something you want to absolutely work somebody up to. Somebody who is fatigued, they're probably not going to start exercising. Usually I'll have them start doing very light movement, light walking whenever possible, then light stretching. If they can't do even that, have them go get a massage. Just have their muscles get used to being pressed or compressed, just so they're ready and getting more adapted to do more physical work, in addition to addressing the metabolic picture as well. As all that needs to happen first before you get people to start exercising. And he's stressed. 8 out of 10 stress. I always try to rate patients' stress each visit. This way we can kind of track how their stress is progressing. And he's overweight, 270 pounds, BMI 39. So lots to work on here. His medications: he's on paroxetine, 20 milligrams QD. This is going to be leading to alteration in serotonin and tryptophan pathways, likely. And then he's on a statin. As some may or may not be aware, statins have a profound propensity for mitochondrial disruption. You will have inhibition of complexes 1, 3, and 4 of the respiratory chain, leading to reduced, because they're inhibiting HMG-CoA reductase, you're going to see reduced CoQ10 production, mitochondrial DNA depletion, reactive oxygen species accumulation, and from this you're going to see impaired insulin secretion and dysregulation of calcium homeostasis. This is a big topic, and this is probably something we could do a whole talk on, because I think there's nuances when to implement statins properly. If you look at the American Heart Association, they recommend diet and lifestyle first and foremost before moving to statin therapy. And I wish more practitioners did that before just putting people on a statin, because you're going to be depleting yourself of CoQ10, dolichols, farnesylated proteins, and you're going to have negative health consequences from that. And there's a genetic component to this. Some people have risk variants, such as the SCLO1B1 gene. There's some risk variants there where you're more likely to have altered concentrations of the medication, suscepting you to myocystitis. So this is a big confounding issue to this guy's health here. He's on a vitamin D K2 supplement. So his goals: improve fatigue, lose excess weight, improve cognition, and help avoid further progression of his metabolic syndrome. So I want to bring him from this poor state to a good state. All right, so let's go through a case example here. So this is the Theriome Aristotle test. If no one has seen it, this is our metabolite test. We have 12 different domains here with this test. We have aging, nutrition, inflammation, mitochondria, cardiovascular, reproductive, liver, gut, neurocognitive, integumentary, environmental toxicity, and mutational load. We rank these domains from poor, normative to optimized, and then from how all these are scored, we create an overall health score. and we're going to do something fun with that later. But so an overall health score is created. We have a bar chart here of the potentiality of where someone can move, because we have interventions that we will recommend based on the metabolites and the health domains and the health score. And so right now his current score is a 67. If he were to adhere to our recommendations, and we have a time to retest, his time to retest like 6 months from now, we calculate that based on how the metabolites are scoring. We could expect a mean average improvement to 71.6. It could be lower, it could be higher, and there's a percent chance of all those ones. But we do include that potentiality test as well. So looking at his metabolites, leave this up to practitioners. Some practitioners don't want to get muddied up with looking at all these individual metabolites. The more you get familiar with this test, you kind of know what metabolites to look at, and you kind of go through it pretty quickly. Yeah, and you could look on, maybe there's certain conditions that you want to focus on, particularly like for this guy, obviously mitochondria is a big one, but just to go through most of them. One big one I look at is niacinamide, which is going to be a precursor for NAD, which is a coenzyme for thousands of different reactions in the human body. Looks pretty good on him. Not really much I want to comment on there. Fumaric acid, TCA cycle metabolite, this is on the lower end. Makes me now begin to suspect that there's some mitochondrial dysfunction going on there. Palmitic acid, so think palm oil. This can be from many different dietary sources. But one thing to know is that if somebody has excess carbohydrate consumption and glucose, their body can start converting that into palmitic acid. So this being higher makes me think that there's some dysregulation going on there. We have elevated stearic acid, which is also a downstream byproduct of that pathway, or he could be consuming a lot of stearic acid in his diet. Nutritional index, so ferulic acid from polyphenol plant-based foods, so that's actually higher end, so that's pretty good. Glucose 6-phosphate, so his body's going through glycolysis pretty decently. Here we are with the fats. So it seems like just fats are high. Palmitic acid high, stearic acid high, oleic acid high, linoleic acid a little bit on the higher end. So we're thinking there's some dysregulation with his body being able to metabolize lipids. So this nucleotide metabolites a little bit on the higher end could be associated with higher protein intake. Inflammatory score, so I just know off the bat here, his palmitic acid, elevated palmitic acid associated with inflammation. So that could be a problem. Glutathione, not too high, not too low. So it's actually promising there. His GABA is actually on the higher end. So that's a good sign there. Mitochondrial health. So we're looking at these TCA cycle metabolites. We're looking for trends, either all highs, all lows, or highs and lows. You know, the patterns can vary depending on the reason as to why there's mitochondrial dysfunction. We're seeing here it's just all low. The succinic acid is low, fumaric acid is low, malic acid is low. So all this TCA cycle metabolites are just scoring low. So there's something going on there with some level of mitochondrial disruption. Cardiovascular health, so homocysteine a little bit elevated. That's of concern. Palmitic acid, we talked about that. And again, niacinamide, nicotinic acid, not really that concerning. Reproductive health, not much I want to glean here. Here's his caffeine, though. Pinging a little bit on the higher end. Makes sense. He's having a lot of coffee, caffeine consumption. Serotonin within normal range here. Liver health, so I might want to increase his protein intake. His amino acids are a little bit on the lower end. And as I discussed, fatty acids, a little bit higher. Gut health, he didn't really have any gut symptoms, and his tryptophan metabolites are high. You know, with serotonin, you don't want to be too high or too low. That could lead to gut dysregulation. So this could be a little bit on the higher end for my liking. Neurocognitive index, it wasn't that much here. His GABA is normal, serotonin, well, his GABA is a little bit on the higher end. It could be a problem for like over exacerbating lethargy. So that might be something we want to focus on there. Serotonin within the range here. Taurine, I think, yeah, this one's interesting. It's something from his methylation cycle where it's just making more taurine. Glutamine, it's in the range here. Adenine, adenosine, a little bit higher. Malic acid, so this being low. Usually this is more of a problem if it's higher, so I'm not that concerned with it. Myo-inositol, we could consider this. It does help with blood sugar regulation. And he's on the lower end there. Skin health, I don't think there's anything I want to mention with this. Environmental toxin exposure. So taurine and glutathione look pretty good. Uricanic acid, this is a marker of oxidative stress. It's on the lower end. That's pretty good. We have these metabolites that are associated with detoxification, cysteine, cyclothionein, methionine. A little bit on the higher end. So maybe his body is having some more turnover of using these compounds for detox. So this could indicate some level of environmental exposure. But here's his TCA cycle metabolites, again, all on the low end of the range. Mutational load. So high levels of this could indicate high mutational load. These are these purine metabolites, adenine, guanosine, inosine, adenosine. So something to keep in mind there, though his taurine and glutathione are within the range. We have his methylation efficiency index. So we're looking at how these metabolites are associated with methylation. Basically, the further away, the less likely they are to be directly affecting it. There's like a cystathione, and so cystathione is elevated. His glycine and methionine are a little bit on the lower end. So there might be something to keep in mind there. So, glycine might be something to consider supplementing with this guy. His methionine is a little bit on the lower end. So there could be some impaired methylation that's going on here. And especially he's only scoring at 50 there. So there's definitely some room for improvement. Sarcosine and methylglycine on the lower end. So low glycine, low N-methylglycine. His homocysteine was elevated in the cardiovascular section. So probably want to do some methylation support. All right, we have something called, so for y'all that are new to this, we have something called digital twinning. So from the person's health information that we get, their health history, the supplements they're taking, their dietary preferences, we have that information we collect on an intake, and then we have their metabolite information, we have their health score. So that's version 1 of that individual. We then make another digital copy of that individual, or a digital twin, and then we expose that digital twin to an intervention. For example, we expose them to nicotinamide mononucleotide. We see, okay, if we were to introduce this to this digital twin of this individual, how would it impact the health score? Let's say it impacts it, a fraction of a percent. We then go, okay, what if we added other interventions? And then we tally those interventions up to see from what we can recommend overall, what's going to have the greatest improvement in the health score based on their health history and based on their metabolites. So from that, a digital twinning personalized protocol is created. We also have a time to retest based on that, 6 months. And so recommendations that were elicited. So there are some circumstances where even though his nicotinamide was in the middle, if we were to give NMM, it could additionally help. And so that's what's happening here. Nicotinamide mononucleotide is to be recommended. Astaxanthin, antioxidant. I actually love this. This thing is really good. 6 milligrams daily. Dietary changes, Mediterranean style diet, rich in polyphenols and unsaturated fats. Super important. We got to change his diet up from where he's currently at. So we'll definitely want to be implementing that. And for these, there's a lot of domains and a lot of recommendations. For people that are overwhelmed with this, sticking just to one domain for recommendations, that might be best. For the context of this conversation, in this case, we could kind of go through them all. Within the Mediterranean diet, emphasizing more seafood. We want to get more selenium to help with a variety of things, but just as nutrition in general. Brazil nut, 1 daily would be good. Increased vitamin C carotenoids, red and yellow peppers would be an example there. Inflammatory score, continue doing his vitamin D3 supplementation, but monitor vitamin D levels just to make sure it's not going too high. He was not on any other anti-inflammatory herbs, so recommending curcumin, Mariva, specifically 500 milligrams with meals, and he has to decrease his high-fat meals. That's likely contributing to his inflammation, especially because it's being converted to arachidonic acid, which is precursor for prostaglandins and leukotrienes and other pro-inflammatory mediators. Mitochondrial health, so big ones we need to do. CoQ10, I showed in those studies that could help with mitochondrial dysfunction. The digital twinning ID'd that he should be initiating this, so 200 milligrams daily for ubiquinol, adding PQQ, which is an even stronger antioxidant than CoQ10, and will help keep CoQ10 reduced for usage. So add PQQ, daily green tea supplement, 400 milligrams EG/CG, and then time-restricted eating. This is going to help with the weight loss in addition to helping with mitochondrial health and metabolic regulation. So for endothelial function, blood pressure, arugina bark, and this will also help stabilize blood pressure. Flax seeds, 1 tablespoon daily. And then even though his taurine was within the range, you still could benefit from some more. Taurine has so many different uses in the body. So taurine 1 gram daily to reduce arterial stiffness. We're already recommending a bunch of things for this individual. He's not trying to have children, so we could add some of these, maybe the zinc, but not really necessary. I want to add there. Helping with general detox, his liver score was sort of in the middle. Milk thistle, NAC, just to help with, again, the liver health, detox in general. Add these things. Milk thistle with cinnamon, 300 milligrams twice daily, and NAC, 600 milligrams twice daily. Recommend this on an empty stomach. And then adding cruciferous vegetables as part of a healthy diet to support detox. Gut health, this would probably be a case where I'd want to do a microbiome test on this guy to get a little bit more information from his gut. But just as a baseline, and just from the metabolites that we measured, his gut looked pretty good. He could still benefit just because his diet's likely lacking fermented foods. Adding some fermented foods would be of interest. Neurocognitive, he scored an 8. He still mentioned he had some neurocognitive concerns, so we could still make recommendations there. Really like lion's mane for so many different benefits, neuronal growth factor, BDNF upregulating factor, so 1 gram daily there. Alpha GPC for acetylcholine synthesis, and then performing cognitive exercises just to challenge his brain to increase that neuroplasticity. Tegumentary, not really going to make any recommendations there. Environmental detox, this guy's working with carpets. So he's likely exposed to just a litany of different environmental exposures. And so just to help with detoxification, we could add chlorella as a binding agent wherever he's working, or at least in his home. Make sure he's using a activated carbon filter to help minimize VOC exposure. And then just to support detoxification, infrared sauna 3 times a week, 20 minutes daily to help support detoxification. And to support methylation and subsequently his mutational load, methylated folate, 1 milligram daily. Also, resveratrol can help. This might be, we're already adding a lot of supplements to this guy, so I don't know if I would actually add resveratrol to this. Maybe something considering future visits. And same thing with the broccoli seed extract. Probably just get him started with the broccoli. And then with these tests, we have all the metabolites at the bottom here. So if anyone was curious about what the metabolite is, what does it mean if it's low, what does it mean if it's high, it's all listed there. But okay, let's go back to this. So, okay, notable pathways imbalance. We kind of made note of that. Mitochondria was a big one. Liver was another one. Environmental toxicity, big ones. And then there were some other metabolites kind of scattered throughout. Notable metabolites, some of the methylation stuff, glycine, sarcosine, important. Fatty acids were a little bit dysregular. Palmitic acid, my one more mainly concerning ones. And then the TCA cycle metabolites. These were all on the lower end of the range. So it makes me further consider the mitochondrial dysfunction. Notable interventions that we're going to get started with. We're going to have them consider time-restricted eating, 10-hour eating window, use activated carbon filter at home to help minimize VOC exposure, do infrared sauna 3 times weekly, get him started with the sleep hygiene thing. I know sleep was not actually recommended on this report, but that's just from the case he has to get the sleep better. So have a discussion with him about what to do when you wake up to help set yourself up for sleep later on in the day, and then what to do at night in order to help have more restful sleep. For his diet, recommend green tea. They recommended EGCG. I think we might just get him started on green tea instead of having the espresso in the morning, or at least one of the espresso shots. Usually I'd say if you're having 2 espresso shots, try to switch one of those with green tea. And if it's 1 espresso shot, switch with green tea just to help with that. Eliminate high-fat meals, Mediterranean diet, increasing fish consumption, salmon, 1 Brazil nut daily, dark leafy greens especially for the methylation cofactors there. For supplements, we're going to get them started on niacinamide, astaxanthin, Mariva curcumin, mitochondrial support supplements, CoQ10, PQQ, alpha GPC, and NAC to support detox. All right, so some takeaways from this. So fatigue has multiple causes. One needs to consider diet, lifestyle, genetic, and environmental exposures when exploring fatigue. Mitochondrial dysfunction plays a crucial role in the pathophysiology of fatigue. Metabolites associated with fatigue include TCA cycle metabolites, fatty acids, and detoxification markers. And for this, the fatigue plan was to implement various different lifestyle, diet, and supplement interventions, and follow up in 1 month to assess protocol adherence, and then to do repeat testing of the metabolites within 6 months to see how he is shifting in response to the interventions. So with that, thank you so much for attending. If you are interested in our test, if you put your email into the chat, we could set you up with an opportunity to either speak with myself or someone else regarding possibly getting started with the test. And also, if you go to our website, you could sign up. There's a booking link too, if you wanted to sign up. But otherwise, with that, I will take your questions, and thank you so much for attending. And otherwise, I will look in the chat to see if there is. So we do have one question here. How do people who handle mold do it? Am I the unlucky 25% and almost died from coffee that did nothing to him? What can I do to handle it? I feel similarly. There's the hypothesis that people, when they get vaccinated, if they're eating like a peanut around the time they get vaccinated, or if they've drank milk around the time they were vaccinated, as the body kind of freaks out and tries to make an immune response to the antigen in the vaccine, they will also make antibodies against the food protein. So there's this association between food allergies and people that are exposed to certain vaccines. Not that this isn't trying to be an anti-vaccine talk. And this could happen with viral infections as well. So whether it's vaccine or viral infection. It makes me wonder, with people with overt immune dysfunction, what else was the body looking at or being exposed to while it was forming its immune memory? And I just think those people, like if you are exposed to mold at an early age while you're having this immune dysfunction, your body is more likely to identify it as, oh, this is something really serious that we have to deal with. So there's that one immune memory where somebody is just more likely to have a problem with it. 2, there's the cup overflowing approach. And so if you look at molds and mycotoxins, aflatoxin, ochratoxin, A lot of these will use detoxification pathways like glutathione and ochratoxin in order to, or yeah, glutathione will be conjugated to those compounds in order for our body to get rid of it. Our body will use glutathione and cysteine to get rid of a bunch of other things. So if you're also exposed to mold and you're exposed to pesticides and you're exposed to VOCs and you're exposed to plasticizing compounds, how much detox support do you have in order to get rid of those things? And so that's another question too, is when somebody's exposed to mold, what else are they being exposed to that is making them susceptible? And then there's genetic deficiencies as well. Do you make enough endogenous antioxidants in general? How are your NRF2 pathways, which is our antioxidant response element pathways? How is your glutathione production, looking at GST, enzymes, GGT? I mean, there's different markers you could look at and different genes you could look at to extrapolate that. So genetic deficiencies, looking at other exposures at the same time, and then immune dysregulation. There is a gene in the HLA, so human leukocyte antigen, HLA, that is our gene that helps us distinguish self from non-self. When you look at for autoimmunity in general, a lot of times risk variants in various different HLA genes will be associated with autoimmunity risk. And so there is some risk variance in HLA genes. I think it's like HLA, one of the HLA DQs. I don't know if it's DQ2, but that is associated with being more hypersensitive to molds. So yeah, that sucks. I'm one of those people. I definitely am sensitive to mold. I was getting tremors from mold, but actually at the same time I was exposed to mold, I was also exposed to, I measured high for jet fuel metabolites in my blood. So my blood-brain barrier was permeable from the jet fuel metabolites, and then the mold was actually giving me brain inflammation. So it's kind of hit from both ends there. So, but it shows the point that you could be exposed to multiple things at the same time, and it leads to a pathology. HLA-DR. Thank you, Ruth. So, okay. My doctor suggests methylene blue for PVFS and mitochondrial dysfunction. My research says it has lots of negative side effects. Thoughts on methylene blue? Yeah, methylene blue is interesting. I mean, methylene blue is actually administered in hospitals with people with carbon monoxide poisoning. Methylene blue is also the things that make your jeans blue. Well, at least when they used to make jeans blue with methylene blue. I don't know, who knows what they use nowadays. And it can be, it's a powerful antioxidant. It will help with mitochondrial function. You know, there's so many things that could help with mitochondrial health. And with something like methylene blue, my question leading up to that is, what is your diet like? What is your detox strategies like? Are you doing any detox at all? What is your nutrition like? What are your environmental exposures like? Are you doing baseline detoxification protocols? Are you doing glutathione? Are you doing taurine? Are you doing NAC? Are you doing various herbs to help with detox, such as dandelion or schizandra? Also, even to a lesser extent, what is their microbiome? Like the Theriome also offers a microbiome report, and within the microbiome report, we have a section, mycotoxin section, where we're looking at how our microbiome can help eliminate mycotoxins. So I always ask all those questions before I would even jump to a methylene blue. And it's rare that I jump to methylene blue because there's vast improvements when you're implementing all those things. But with that said, I have had people that have had benefits from methylene blue. I tried methylene blue, and then a week later, I had a horrible COVID infection. Now, I don't know if it's a big coincidence. Did methylene blue do something to me that made me susceptible? Was I going to get COVID anyway? I don't know. I think I need to give methylene blue another try. There's lots of questions about methylene blue sourcing, like, you know, quality matters. So I would say if you're going to do methylene blue, make sure it's from a reputable source that you could trust. What do you consider a baseline detox protocol? Well, I think I just kind of alluded to that. So the diet, exercise, infrared sauna, I think is very important if somebody can tolerate it. If not, do it to the extent that you can. Very small chunks, 5 minutes, 10 minutes at a time. I mean, with detox, you have to, one of the first steps is avoiding the offending agent. And so if there is impaired mitochondrial dysfunctioning happening, then what is causing mitochondrial dysfunction? You have to look into your environment to figure it out. Do you live near a golf course? Do you live near a highway? You know, in my circumstance, I was living in San Diego and I was outside frequently. And if anyone has lived in San Diego, there's lots of jets. And I'm not talking airplanes, I'm talking like fighter jets. And they scorch through every time from noon to 2 p.m. And you see this black trail of smoke just kind of trickling down. And at the peak of my environmental illness, I did an environmental toxin test where I looked at different jet fuel metabolites, and they were off the charts. So I was being exposed to these jet fuel metabolites, and it wasn't actually until I moved out of the area that all my symptoms go away. But, you know, where you live can be a very toxic place. Unfortunately, California is very toxic. I don't know why. I mean, especially with lead back in the 1980s, but I don't know what it is about it. Because even with pesticides too, where I lived, at the apartment complex I lived, there was like the leasing agreement, and then there was like 10 pages of all the different like compounds that they were spraying around the environment. And it's like, I don't know what these are, but I guess I gotta live somewhere, right? So anyway, avoiding the exposures is very important because if you could do all the detox support if you want, but it's kind of like, filling up a cup, but there's no bottom. You're just gonna be pouring through. Okay. What about fatigue, foggy brain from perimenopause? Will that show up on these tests? Our tests are not including, so there could be other causes of fatigue. The older you live, the more likely you are to have more environmental exposures. Part of my thinking, honestly, I feel like a lot of aging that people feel aging, especially if you live in the United States, one thing to tease out is how much of that is long-term chronic environmental exposures that the body just can't detox anymore. So, that's definitely a play. But then obviously hormones, lower estrogen is going to affect brain fog. We will have a future version of the Aristotle test. I'm not sure when that will be out, but it's going to be a different type of testing platform. This is GCMS. In order to look at hormones, we have to switch to something called LCMS. With that, we'll look at hormone metabolites and we'll have more information regarding how that might affect things such as perimenopause and brain fog. But otherwise, you would not be able to identify hormone disruption from this metabolite test without looking at those markers. My wife's test showed that her mitochondrial level were low, but she has more energy than Carter has liver pills. There could be other factors that are impacting energy. Mitochondrial dysfunction is a big cause for energy, but it's not solely the own cause. Like, for example, with this guy, his neurotransmitters were pretty good. So if someone has low serotonin, that's going to throw their energy off. If they'll have low GABA, it's going to throw their energy off. Low dopamine, that's going to throw their energy off. So, there's other metabolites that will be playing a role in energy, and norepinephrine, epinephrine. This goes back to the hormone thing too. Like if your hormones are abnormal, that in and of itself could lead to fatigue. So there's other reasons why somebody would have energy, even if their mitochondria was looking pretty good, at least from a test perspective. But with that said, even people with normal mitochondrial functioning, you could get them started on supplements. Like there have been improvements noted in people regardless of this testing. The testing helps kind of zoom in a little bit, but you could try it and then see how they feel. And if they feel better, then you could kind of infer that there's maybe some aspect of mitochondrial health that still can improve, even though some of those metabolites look decent. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, so we have a practitioner training coming out, hopefully by the end of this year. We're going to be going through all this stuff. We'll go through each domain. We'll highlight some metabolites. We'll highlight some of the digital twinning interventions. And we'll be talking about many different aspects of metabolomics. Is there a specific area of testing that could show mitochondrial dysfunction caused by shift work? Other areas may be easier to see toxic exposure. Where does the shift or dysfunctional sleep pattern come into play? I mean, you would expect to see, so for the inflammation section, I would expect that to be dysregulated. We don't have an oxidative stress section. Maybe we'll add one in the future, but I would expect oxidative stress to be elevated. Definitely circadian rhythm. That's hormone metabolites. We don't test for those in the future, but I would absolutely expect to see cortisol off and subsequently basically all hormones to be off. DHEA, I would expect that to be off. True story. When I was in naturopathic school, I did a hormone test, one that had a biological rhythm. I had a late shift. So my last shift got off at like, I don't know, 9. And so I wasn't going to bed until like 12 or 2 a.m. I don't know, it was pretty late. And when I looked at my cortisol rhythm, it was, and not just a look at my cortisol rhythm, I looked at other metabolites. And it was like perfect, but everything was just shifted. It was shifted 4 hours later than what it should be. So just because somebody has an atypical schedule doesn't mean they're doomed. You have to do it healthfully and make sure you're doing the other things. But the large majority of people aren't doing the other things that will help them cope with the abnormal shift work. So you'll identify those in a test. Good questions, though. Great questions, everyone. So, okay, if there is no other questions, okay, we have one more question. Thoughts on the effectiveness of consumption of natural botanical photosensitizers in using light therapies to get mitochondria up and running? And we see if doing this for a month would reflect improvement. By photosensitizers, are you thinking of something like tyrosine or St. John's wort? Which, by the way, I am a big fan of tyrosine, and that can help your body with making more melanocyte stimulating hormone, which will help with gut barrier integrity, which will play a large contributing role in health. So I do like phytosensitizers in general. Things like St. John's wort, which is also strongly antiviral. I'm a big fan of that as well. Though, like for example, this guy on paroxetine, I probably wouldn't recommend St. John's wort because it's gonna alter his dose of medications and it may inflict red light infra. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of red light and infrared light. There's actually a lot of research. Actually, in the Journal of Dermatology, they just published an article on the front page that had infrared light and the benefits for it to stimulate mitochondrial function. So yeah, I am a big fan. But sometimes if somebody's mitochondrial function has been off and then you get it ramped back up, they don't feel well. So you have to be very cautious with light therapy. It's profoundly beneficial, but it could be not good. So there's something that to keep in mind. I'm so glad you asked about hydrogen water. This isn't a hard or fast rule, but in some people, if they have brain fog and they take hydrogen water and they immediately feel like their brain has cleared up, you can bet that they have mitochondrial dysfunction because the molecular hydrogen was like the purest form of hydrogen to go right into the ATP synthase and generate energy, which means the body can use that, but it, for whatever reason, is not being able to use fats, carbs, and proteins well for energy source. Questions about how do you get the hydrogen water? Is it, what supplements and dosaging and I don't know, the devices that are out, they seem like they're not that potent, so, that I can't comment on that much, but I do like hydrogen water as like almost like a test to see how much mitochondrial dysfunction is present. Yep, exactly. Okay, I missed a question here. That when she takes supplements, she regurgitates them. I found that she was reactive to CoQ10 through a bioresonance. A lab test. I'm not sure about a lab test that could show reactions to CoQ10. Not all CoQ10s are the same. What they're formulated in can matter, so that makes me question that. Some people have a bad reaction to CoQ10, honestly. And in those cases, you dose down, and then if they can't tolerate it at all, you have to try something else. We have here oxaloacetate, which is an interesting one. There's been studies with oxaloacetate and concussions. It's actually been shown to help decrease the severity of concussions. I forget, I used to have a supplement on hand. I forget which one it is. Ozone, big one, NAD patch, red light sauna, hydrogen, glutathione. Awesome. Great to hear, Cindy. What reasons do some people have bad reactions to cookies? I honestly think it's kind of like, think of it like a factory. And let's say you had a bombardment, you had bombs going off, whatever. It's a wartime here. And you go to turn, the factory was off, you turn it back on. When you turn on that conveyor belt, there's going to be some debris at some points of the factory that may be malfunctional. Um, when you look in a cell, like a healthy person has a bunch of good, healthy mitochondria. When you get older, you have a bunch of malfunctional mitochondria. Some look malshaped and malformed. They all look weird. So, I think when people, also B vitamins too, I think about this with the methylation cycle as well. When you give methyl donors and you turn on the methylation cycle, if there's blocks in it, something can accumulate and people can feel worse. So this is why you have to go really low with these people, especially if you're facilitating things with detox. Your body might binge wanting to get rid of things out of it. And when you turn on the detox, your body will start liberating things from tissues. And for some people, it's just too much. This is why you have to go very slow. Well, one, you have to use high quality ingredients for doing this one. But two, you have to go very slow in adding this. But that is my best guess. Also, who knows what else is where the CoQ10 is sourced. There's other different types of CoQ10. Sometimes there's weird stabilizing ingredients in there, like potassium sorbate somebody's reacting to, or some supplement brands have straight up gluten in their supplements. So, you got to be careful with that. Mast cell related in the incidents where their mast cells are reacting to the excipients. Yes, that could absolutely explain that. Coffee enemas. It's good. That'll help detox. I mean, for detox, you have to be pooping. If you are not pooping, if actually it's like the baseline, you want to start with making sure the gut is moving. If you're doing all these things and somebody's gut is they're constipated and having 1 to 2 bowel movements a week, that's something that's arguably even more important than the sleep. Though if you improve the sleep, their bowel movements are likely to improve as well. All right, everyone. I appreciate the questions. So yeah, if you want opportunity to speak with me, you can sign up on the website through the link. I'm just going to put the link in the chat. Yeah, so this is the test I showed today is the Aristotle. We also have a microbiome test called the Elia. And so if you are interested in either of those, let me know. Otherwise, y'all enjoy your Friday, and maybe we'll see you in the future. Take care. Thank you, Michael.